Thank you to our volunteers for bringing this to us as staff, saying we need more of this. And thank you as a community for showing up to be supportive of our youth. So with that said, I'd like to turn things over to our presenter today from the Center for National Missing and Exploited Children, Ms. Megan Zara. She is their program director of the state of Texas. So would you make her welcome as she gets ready to bring this to you?
So thank you for having me. Like Keith said, my name is Megan Zara. I work for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's Texas Regional Office. I am our program director for the state, so I oversee all of our programs, prevention education for kids, and professional training. And then I also serve the north half of the state of Texas. So I am based out of Dallas, but the north half of the state starts at Waco. So my territory is basically, if you draw a line at Waco, east, west, across the state, I go everywhere from El Paso to the tip of the Panhandle, out to Texarkana, and all the way down to Waco and everywhere in between. And I'm really happy to be here with y'all today. I was telling Keith, I am just coming off maternity leave. I just had my first baby at the beginning of February, and this is my first professional training since I've been back. So I already remembered something that I forgot, which is my business cards. But at the end, I will have a slide with my information on it, same as my business cards, so you can write it down or take a picture, so that if you ever need to contact me, either about training or about a case or anything like that, I'm always here as a resource for y'all. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself so you can know kind of what my expertise is, especially because this training that you're seeing here today is one that I primarily developed because of my background in working with kids in care. So I have worked with kids in a variety of capacities for about 15 years now. Prior to coming to the National Center, I was an attorney ad litem for kids in care since 2008. I got my law degree at University of Texas, and I really loved representing kids in care. But about 4 years ago, I felt like I was constantly on the back end of bad things happening to my kids, and I wasn't really able to be proactive. And obviously that's the nature of being an attorney ad litem. You only get assigned a case once a kid already has an open abuse or neglect case. But I got this opportunity through the National Center to come and work on prevention education, and one of the things that I felt like we needed to implement right away was training that was specific to what we see of the exploitation in kids in care. Because they are such a vulnerable population, they have so many additional vulnerabilities, and all of the information that we have and that I'm going to share with you guys today, you will see how bleak really the statistics are as far as kids in care being targeted for exploitation and trafficking. I had a little video that is an introduction to the center. I had it, I should say, not had, it's there. But Keith and I, between us, we're not the best tech experts, and so we can't get the audio running, and it's not that cool with just the video. So what it is an introduction to the center and who we are. If you are not familiar with the name, the National Center, if you had seen the little video, you would have seen a guy shaking President Obama's hand. That guy is John Walsh. So if you've ever watched America's Most Wanted or The Hunt with John Walsh, John and his wife Hervé are our initial founders. We were written into existence by President Reagan in 1984. There is a special federal law that makes the National Center exist and congressionally designates us to run 22 different programs nationwide. When we were started because of the lack of resources, specifically with respect to missing kids cases. So I said that John and his wife Hervé founded us. Many people are not aware that John's interest in criminal justice comes out of his family's own experiences. So prior to his family's tragedy, he was a real estate developer. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't involved in kids' issues or in law enforcement issues. But in 1981, their 6-year-old son Adam was abducted from a Sears store in Hollywood, Florida, and 2 weeks later only a portion of his remains were recovered. And in those 2 weeks, John and Hervé learned a lot about what law enforcement was and was not doing in response to a missing child report. So think, if you can, back to the early 80s. Some of you look a little young for that, but if you can remember the early 80s, at that time we had no Amber Alerts. We had no centralized database that missing children's reports were put into. And we had no standardized protocols that law enforcement had to adhere to when a parent or guardian called and said, I don't know where my kid is. All of those things we do now have, and they are a product of the public-private partnership between the National Center, law enforcement, and legislators at the local, state, and federal level. So one of the ways that people are most familiar with what we do at a national level is we work with law enforcement to recover missing and exploited children. I say work with law enforcement because they are always the front line. Our job is to assist them and provide them additional resources to recover these kids. In Texas, we have a number of different teams. Our physical offices are in Dallas, which is me, I am the Dallas office, and then everyone else offices out of Austin. So we have 3 teams. We have my team. We have a team of missing and exploited children case managers, so people that are actively working on kids' cases. And then we also have a case analysis division team, and they are the people that provide statistical analysis, data trends, things like that, that again help us improve our education and training, but also help law enforcement on active cases that they are working. I'm going to start briefly with talking about missing children. And the reason why I start a training about exploitation and about trafficking with missing children is when it comes to the numbers of kids that are actively being exploited and trafficked, there really is no reliable number of this is how many kids it's happening to. I'm going to give you numbers about what we know about the kids that we do find that it's happening to, but to blanket say, and there are plenty of statistics out there that people like to throw around, 300,000 kids are being trafficked in the U.S. today. That's a really common one you'll see in news reports. But the National Center has no data validity for those numbers. And unfortunately, because sex trafficking is something that's such a hot button issue right now, there are so many different people that are trying to wrap their hands around what really is the prevalence of this. But at the National Center, we want to be sure that we don't state any numbers that we are not sure and we cannot prove how we came up with these numbers, because the reality is sex trafficking, even as Keith said, it happens everywhere. But if I come into your community and I throw out all these big numbers to shock you, and then you ask me where I got those numbers and I can't give you good data validation, it's going to make it seem like maybe I'm making up the problem, or I'm saying that it's this big deal and it's not this big deal. So we really want to stick to numbers that we know, because that way, especially as you go out and talk to people in your communities about this issue, you're going to get lots of people that are skeptical. And if they hear numbers that really don't seem to fit with any studies or any data, it's going to make them feel like, oh, these are just people that they just bleeding hearts for kids, and of course they're hysterical about this problem. But there are plenty of numbers that will show that it is a big problem. When it comes to the National Center, there's 2 things to know about missing children's cases. Every report matters to us, and no child is ever forgotten. So there's going to be some things that I talk about that are specific to kids missing from care, and hopefully some of the things I'm talking about are things that you already have been trained on, things that you already know. For most of y'all, if you are CASAs and you do not work for DFPS, the mandates I'm going to be talking about, they don't apply to you in the sense that it's not a directive to you to do anything. But as I'm sure many of you have noticed over the cases that you've been special advocates for kids, oftentimes you have a caseworker, a DFPS caseworker or supervisor on your child's case that is not extremely proactive, that does not do the things that you believe that they're supposed to be doing. So when we're working for kids, whether it's as a CASA, whether it's as a kids advocate and attorney, even if, for example, it's not my job to make these reports, you better believe that I'm going to make sure that the person who is supposed to be making those reports knows that I know that this is the rule, and make sure that they communicate with me that they've done what they're supposed to do, because we're all trying to get the best outcome for a kid. So every report matters. That means that it does not matter if this is the first time your child has gone missing or the 15th time they've gone missing. We take every report equally seriously, and they all get worked to their conclusion. That is especially important for kids in care. How many of y'all have ever been advocates for middle school or high school age kids? Okay. I personally, when I was an attorney, I primarily took middle school and high school aged kids, because all the attorneys are lining up to represent the babies and the toddlers. Those are surprisingly very easy clients to deal with. But I really love clients that hate me while I'm trying to help them. So I was like, give me the middle schoolers and high schoolers. I'm down for those kids. And what you know if you work with that age population often is that when you have kids that run from care or run from their placements, they don't usually just run one time over the course of their case. They usually go missing multiple times. And I say go missing, they may end up being found at a friend's house, a family friend's house. You know, they don't like their placement, and so they keep running from it. But they go missing multiple times, and all of those cases get handled equally as seriously. And then when I say no child is ever forgotten, I mean that no child ages out of the National Center system once they have an open case. So that again is important for kids in care. I can tell you, probably about 6 months ago, I had a call, and I get these calls very frequently, with a CASA in this area. And she told me that she had a kid on her caseload that had been missing for about 6 months. You know, they were continuing to work with law enforcement, work with the center to look for her, but her case was about to be closed in a few weeks at court because she was aging out of care. The judge felt like they had done their best efforts to look for her, but they weren't going to find her, and so, you know, her case was going to be closed. That is understandable, and obviously I clearly understand the legal deadlines that you have for cases of abuse or neglect here in Texas. But when a kid is on the run and their case gets closed, they effectively no longer have an attorney, they no longer have DFPS caseworkers, and technically they don't have CASAs anymore because you guys don't, there's no appointment for you to be working under. Do I know many CASAs that continue to try to work with and communicate and advocate for this kid? Sure, because they know the kid's missing and they want to make sure that they know the kid's safe before they, you know, stop working on the case. But in reality, there are no obligations past that case being closed in court. So for a kid who is in the system, who is missing, and who loses all of their court-appointed overseers, so to speak, there's often not people that are advocating for where is this kid, what is going on now. So know that even if their court case gets closed, the National Center is still going to keep looking for them until they're located. The way to access our hotline is by calling 1-800-THE-LOST. It's a 24/7, 365 hotline. We never close for holidays or bad weather or anything. We have locations in 2 different states to ensure that even if we have bad weather in one area, that we are still able to communicate with families, with concerned individuals, and with law enforcement. The case managers on the hotline, they alone have assisted in the recovery of more than 250,000 children since its inception. One thing I will let you know about the hotline is we take information from anyone, but we can only provide information to law enforcement or the child's legal guardian. So that sometimes is very difficult for CASAs because you are never your appointed child's legal guardian. So if you call in and say, hey, my kid's missing, but I know that they've been found with these friends before, or their aunt lives in Corsicana and they've gone there before, things like that. We'll take all that information. It all gets, you know, investigated. We just can't tell you what's going on with the case. You can only get that information via the caseworker or law enforcement, and that's part of the privacy rules. So to give you an idea of scope, I mentioned earlier that we, in 81, when Adam Walsh went missing, that we didn't have a centralized database, but now we do. It's called NCIC. The Texas component of it is called TCIC. And it doesn't only have missing children's reports, it has all types of different crime-related reports in there, but we're obviously just talking about kids. So in 2017, there were 464,324 reports entered into the national database. And I say entered because obviously if a kid is never reported missing, or if law enforcement doesn't have to enter that report in, i.e. if they get found within the first 8 hours of being going missing and being reported to law enforcement, it's potential that they won't be entered into that database. One of the ways that we know that not all kids are reported missing is we have a team at the National Center that assists law enforcement in identifying unidentified child remains. So a body has been found, it's clearly a juvenile, but there's no missing report that seems to match the characteristics of this child. Someone knows who this kid is and probably knows what happened to the child, and that's why they haven't been reported missing. But those type of cases would not be reflected in the numbers from NCIC. And then you can see I gave you the breakdown. Texas, a little over 43,000 of the cases last year, about 10%. And that's what we tend to see year to year. 10% of the national cases, missing children's cases, are Texas originated. So that number should not particularly surprise you. 10% of kids in the US live in Texas. Even though we're not 10% of the overall population, we are 10% of the child population of the US. So unfortunately, for any of us who work for systems or nonprofits that serve kids in Texas, we are always going to be uniquely burdened because we just have so many kids in this state. And then you can see 2017, 47 of those missing children's reports were from Henderson County. Now I put on there Dallas County because that's the closest big, very populated county that you guys are next to. If you're from another area and you want me to tell you those numbers, I have numbers for all 254 Texas counties, so I'm happy to pull them up for you. But this is just to give you an idea of how many kids were reported missing to law enforcement in 1 year, and that report made it into NCIC, okay? When a child is reported missing, we categorize that child into one of 5 categories. You can see that by and large, the cases of missing children are largely endangered runaways. 88% of the cases over the last 5 years are kids that left on his or her own. I will tell you that in the few years that I've been at the National Center, I have noticed a disturbing trend on social media of posts that go viral every 3 to 6 months where someone says, I was in Target and someone was talking weird to my child and blah, 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 it was sex trafficking. No, it wasn't. It just wasn't. That's not how sex trafficking happens. But then you get people that share this post over and over. And people keep reading it and saying, oh my God, we got to keep our kids close to us. That person who was talking to your kid, they definitely were going to abduct them and sex traffic them. And you even get, and one of the viral posts was from Longview, one of the recent ones. You even get law enforcement that says, we have investigated this person's claim. We find no evidence that this had anything to do with sex trafficking. But people keep sharing it. And I, at one point, would go on there and say, this is my area of expertise. This isn't how sex trafficking starts. You shouldn't be putting this information out there because it gets people worried about the wrong things, right? And then I would get people that say to me, better safe than sorry. And I would say, no, not better safe than sorry, okay? That is idiotic because there are a lot of things, and I especially know now as a parent myself, there are a lot of things to be concerned about as a parent, okay? I was talking with my best friend yesterday. She wants to move. She wants to get a pool in her backyard. Her kids are older than mine. And I was like, Roxy, pools are dope, but I definitely would not have a pool in my backyard because I know the statistics on young kids drowning in pools, okay? That is just a risk I am not willing to take at this point. Your kids are older than mine. If my kids were your kids' age, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it, right? But that's the thing. I can't be worried about everything simultaneously. Or I guess I can and never let my child go anywhere or do anything or talk or breathe or eat the wrong foods or play any sports, or there's a million things, right? So we've got to prioritize what we're worried about. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because people love to talk about kids being abducted by strangers, and then obviously within the realm of sex trafficking, people being abducted into these rings of trafficking, okay? That is simply not what we see, okay? You can see non-family abductions, 538 nationwide over the last 5 years. So about 100 per year in the entire country versus 465,000 in just 1 year. Okay, so you can see how small that is. And non-family abductions, they constitute two types of abductions. They are kids that are taken by a stranger and kids that are taken by someone known to them but not related to them. Okay, so they were taken by a coach. That's a non-family abduction. So I think it's important that when you are spreading your knowledge to your communities, your churches, that you let people know that the reason why exploitation and trafficking are so concerning is because they are not high-profile crimes. They are not someone walking into Target and snatching a kid and running out with them and then selling them. They are people coming into your homes via your kids' devices when nobody is looking. They are people grooming your kids in very subtle ways, okay? And then you can see the other types of cases that we have, family abductions. I do think it's important, and you guys are probably familiar with this, especially working with kids that are in care. It is possible for a kid to be abducted by a parent, okay? Especially when it comes to divorce cases, there's a lot of misunderstandings about when law enforcement can get involved. The easiest way to understand is if a parent says, my child was abducted by dad, if mom knows where dad is with the kids but dad just won't bring the kids back, that's a civil matter. If mom does not know where dad is with the kids, that is a criminal matter. That is an abduction situation, okay? Lost, injured, or otherwise missing. We have two types of cases that fit into that category, 1.3% of our cases over the last 5 years. One is we don't know enough about the child's disappearance, and so we just have to have kind of a catch-all category. But the other is that the child went missing on his or her own, but we believe that they lack the age or the mental capacity to be classified as an endangered runaway. Most of the cases that fall into that category are kids that are special needs and that they've wandered off on their own. So one thing to be aware of, especially as you work with kids in care, with respect to statistics on autism spectrum disorder, in the US, 1 in 66 kids will be diagnosed on the spectrum before they reach age 18, and half of kids on the spectrum will wander from a safe environment at some point. So unfortunately, a lot of the cases that the center and law enforcement work of missing special needs kids are kids on the spectrum that have wandered and they are attracted to particular dangers that they cannot appreciate the dangers of. So we tend to find them near road crossings, near railroad crossings, and near bodies of water. And you can imagine why all three of those would be particularly dangerous for kids that cannot appreciate the danger of them. So that's just something, a little piece of knowledge for you to have in the back of your mind if you are working with kids on the spectrum. Because it's important if they go missing to let law enforcement know right away that this is a special needs child, because that definitely changes the type of investigation they do. And then at the bottom, section 5779 cases, 1.9% of our cases. One thing to know is that we are authorized to search for critically missing children up to age 21. So at age 18, they are able to run away, okay? Other than if they have a DFPS court order that prevents them, that places them somewhere past age 18. But for most cases, once you reach age 18, you can run away. There's not anything that we can do about it, that parents can do about it. But critically missing, so kids that are believed to go missing under suspicious circumstances, we can continue to assist law enforcement on their cases and treat them like a child case until they reach age 21. That's important for a lot of reasons. The prevailing neurobiology now tells us that our brains don't finish forming until we reach age 26. You know, there's a lot of I don't want to say pop psychology because it's not really pop psychology, pop science out there that'll tell you boys' brains develop later than girls' brains, okay? That's not what the science says. Boys just act like their brains develop later. So around age 26, our brains are fully formed. If you're not 26 yet, I'm sorry, you're still developing. You're not technically an adult yet. But when our brains finish forming, the last portion of our brains that forms is what's known as our executive function. It controls a logical thought process. So, it controls a lot of things, but logical thought process is the most important for the kind of work we do. So, if you have ever had, or yourself, or worked with a middle schooler, you have probably had a conversation like this. Your child has done something that you find to be unfortunate. You might even consider it to be a stupid decision. And you say to that child, what were you thinking? And they say, I don't know. And your brain explodes. Literally explodes. And I say literally because you feel like something broke inside you. Because you don't understand how that child could make that decision and think that they were going to come away with no consequences. This was going to end out well for them. That is because your executive function works properly. You can say pros, cons clearly outweigh the pros. I can make this decision, but it is not going to end well for me, okay? But your kid literally does not have neural synapses to that portion of their brain yet. It is very frustrating, don't get me wrong. I have already started to prime the pump on my husband for this because I can already see, even though we have an infant, that he's like, why doesn't she X? And I'm like, because she literally hasn't developed that yet, okay? So I know this is gonna happen when our daughter is middle school, high school, especially if she's anything like me and loves to argue with her parents. So be aware that when you're working with kids, they did not process that decision making the way you are processing it in your brain. So when they say, I don't know what I was thinking, they really don't know. They're not just trying to irritate you. They find lots of other ways to purposefully irritate you. So that 26 is part of what is the impetus behind us working on cases up to 21. I would be happy to work on cases up to age 26, but that's not a universal. They're not adults till then. And as I think of it, I was already an attorney before I was 26, so that is kind of scary. But when it comes to sex trafficking, there was a federal law enacted a couple of years ago, probably about 4 years ago now, almost 4, and it is known as the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act. It is a federal law because of the statistics that we were seeing nationwide with respect to kids missing from and being trafficked from care. And this is a federal law that was actually sponsored by our senior senator here in Texas, John Cornyn. So, this chart up here shows some of the numbers that we in Texas were working with regard to kids missing from care. Okay, so in 2013, DFPS told us only 53 kids went missing from care in the entire state for the entire year. Okay, 53 is an absolutely ludicrous number. There are more than 53 kids missing from the DFW area right now. Okay, I can just tell you that. Kids in care, they run a lot of times. So 53 is ridiculous. And then on top of that, we at the National Center assisted law enforcement on 63 cases of sex trafficked kids from Texas foster care. So we already have a gap of 10 just on the cases that we were asked to help law enforcement with. That's not considering even the cases that no one knew was happening because no one was reporting these kids missing. So one of the components of that law is a mandatory report. You heard me say earlier that we know that not all kids are reported missing. If you are a parent and your kid is not involved with your state's CPS system in any way, it is not illegal for you not to report your kid missing. Okay? There's no mandate under the law that if my kid goes missing, I have to say something to law enforcement. But if the kid is involved with CPS, with social services, there is a mandate. Within 24 hours of them going missing, they have to be reported missing to the National Center and to law enforcement. Period. That is the mandate, okay? That mandate went into effect in September 2016. You can see curious things happen with the numbers once DFPS was mandated to report kids missing from care. For those of you that have been CASAs or caseworkers or have worked with kids in the system for a long time, you know that 2016 and 2017 weren't especially crappy years for those kids. Every year is a crappy year for those kids. And I mean that in the nicest way. The state is not designed to be a parent, okay? The state is stepping in where the parents of this child have already failed, so we are already not the best solution. And then on top of that, for most of these kids, they have endured a lot of complex trauma that gives them even more special needs above and beyond just what a general kid would need to thrive and succeed. So we are placing them in a parenting situation that is less than ideal, and we know that they have additional hurdles to overcome, and that's part of what makes them so vulnerable. As I mentioned, unless you are the child's CPS caseworker, you have no legal mandate to report the child missing either. However, I encourage you to be very proactive with these cases. I will say personally, before coming to the center and since being at the center, for most of the CPS kids that I've worked on or been involved with their cases, the CASAs have been the most critical in helping us recover them quickly. Because the CASAs have had a lot of personal information about the child just from talking with the child and having a rapport with them, that they were able to add that information to what NCMEC or law enforcement knew just from looking at a case file. So, like I said, I encourage you to make the child's caseworker aware that you know of the mandate and to continue to follow up with that until you see that the child has been entered into NCMEC's database. I have plenty of CASAs in the Dallas area that when their kid's flyer is generated, they start to share that flyer on social media themselves because it's a public flyer. You guys have probably seen them before, the missing kids flyers. And we've had plenty of kids that have just been recovered because the CASAs have been sharing their flyer. And what happens is someone who knows the kid says, oh, Johnny's staying with me. I didn't know that he wasn't supposed to be staying with me. I don't want to be in trouble, you know, Megan, CASA. Johnny's with me, come pick him up, right? Because Johnny told me it was fine for him to stay with me. But we need to know where this kid is. So in order to facilitate that process, again, you can call in any information to the 1-800-THE-LOST, but we also have an online resource for reporting. And you can find any of that at our Missing Kids website. So, moving on to talking about sex trafficking and online exploitation, one of the things, and I already kind of started to talk about this, one of the things that's most important when it comes to sex trafficking is that we don't feed into any of the common myths about what sex trafficking looks like. While I was on maternity leave, I definitely had occasion to watch more daytime TV than I normally do. You know, sitting, hanging out, breastfeeding my daughter, you just have a lot of downtime with nobody to talk to. And so I watched, you know, all my favorite criminal shows. I'm definitely a big Law and Order buff, which is weird because most lawyers are like, this is so dumb, no case wraps up that fast. Doesn't matter, I love it. This is the way cases should wrap up, exactly in 1 hour. But when you watch all those type of shows, Law and Order, Blind Spot, Blacklist, you see that for all of these popular shows over the last 5 years or so, they've all tackled sex trafficking at least once or twice, okay? And when they portray sex trafficking, it is very stereotypical in the way they portray it. It is people being chained, it is people that are being brought across international borders, it's only women. They make it as hyper crazy as they can. You know, again, it's TV. They want it to be interesting to watch. But the reality is that that is really not the way sex trafficking looks here in the United States. Obviously, at the center, we only handle child sex trafficking cases. So even though on missing kids cases we can work up to 21, sex trafficking, 18 is the hard line threshold. Once a kid turns 18, for the purposes of all the sex trafficking statutes, they are considered an adult. So one of the things to be aware of when it comes to sex trafficking laws is that there are two types of people that get prosecuted under sex trafficking laws. Two types of people that can sex traffic a minor. One is the pimp, okay? The pimp transports, entices, recruits, harbors. The pimp is the one that gets the kid and offers them for sale often. But then you can see in blue we have solicits or patronizes. And the reason why we have that in blue is those were additional changes to the law. Solicits or patronize targets the Johns, the buyers, okay? Obviously, we've had anti-prostitution laws for as long as we've probably had laws. You've heard prostitution, world's oldest enterprise, oldest job. But when it comes to trafficking, and especially trafficking of minors, the reason why the laws are different and they criminalize Johns in the same boat as the sellers, buyers and sellers together, is that trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry, okay? It is not simply just someone offering $50 for, sex in the back of a car. It is a criminal enterprise that rivals illegal weapons and illegal drug sale, okay? It is the #2 currently profitable criminal industry in the world. So we want to make sure that when someone is caught trafficking a minor, that even if they are the buyer, that they are punished the same way the seller is punished. Because, and this would seem very simple to understand, if we don't have demand, there isn't going to be a supply. If we don't have people in our communities that want to purchase kids for sex, there aren't going to be people selling kids for sex. So we have to target both of them and identify that they are both part of that transaction equally and should both be criminalized equally. Then you can see up here it says, any means if under 18, no force, fraud, or coercion required. So, like I said, we don't handle over 18 cases, but that is not to say that someone over 18 can't be sex trafficked. It's just that the victims have to prove, or the prosecutors have to prove the additional elements of either force, fraud, or coercion. And that's not often difficult to show because there is often force and fraud and coercion all in one case. Convincing someone to do this, beating them up, tricking them in some way. But with kids, we don't have to prove any of that additional element. And part of the reason why that is important is, especially with kids in the foster care system, we see that many of them do not have a traditional pimp that you would think of. They are selling themselves, okay? They are advertising themselves. No one is taking a cut from them or is helping them promote themselves. They are putting their own ads out there and they are managing it all by themselves, okay? So you would think, okay, that's complicated because the person is technically, providing that service, but they're also the victim. At the National Center, we only recognize them as a victim if they're under 18. It doesn't matter if they say, I wanted to do it, I like doing it, I make money this way, this is how I support myself. The law recognizes that if they are under 18, they cannot make a choice to engage in prostitution. There are no child prostitutes. That isn't an option for them. And we don't use that terminology as well. And one thing I also like to point out is, especially for those of you that deal with older teenagers that are getting close to aging out and are going to get close to this threshold of 18, and maybe your community is not like this, but certainly in larger cities, we have plenty of people that'll say, once they turn 18, if they want to be a commercial sex worker, we should let them do that, okay? We should back away from this if that's what they want to do. Or you'll have people that'll say, there are plenty of women, and they specifically reference women, there are plenty of women out there that are sex workers that say, I want to be involved in this life. This is what I choose to do, okay? Look, I personally have never met someone who has been recovered in a case who maintains that they wanted to do it. Some of them say in the beginning they wanted to do it, but once they have a stable environment and therapeutic resources, it becomes pretty clear and they are able to admit that they didn't want to do this, or this was a toxic environment, or whatever. But if I did have someone say to me, hey, here's this lady and she's going to tell you that she wants to be a prostitute. She's an adult and she chooses it willingly. I'm going to say, I'm willing to hear you out, but here's the deal. When I was in high school and I was getting ready to decide on my path post-high school, it wasn't like doctor, lawyer, or maybe prostitute. Okay? That was never an option that ever crossed my mind. And why is that? Well, obviously part of that has to do with the family I was raised in, but part of it also has to do with the fact that I had a secure home. I had food stability. I didn't have to worry about where my next meal was coming from, or if I was going to have clothes or a place to stay or anything like that, okay? So the world truly was open to me, and that meant that being a stripper or being a prostitute or any of those things never crossed my mind as a legitimate option for me. So with many of these kids, you have to understand that they feel like this is the best option for them, and that part of why they have a hard time getting out of the life even when they decide they don't want to do it is, let's say you get out of being trafficked and you say, okay, I want to have a legitimate job, I want to get education, I'm 25. I've been in the life since I was 14, 15, okay? What am I going to put on my resume? I'm not going to tell future employers my experiences. What have I been doing from 18 to 25 that they want to know about? Okay, so now I'm probably looking at real lower level entry jobs. Okay, I'm going to go apply at the McDonald's, the Brahms. They might not care about me having a resume. Well, they're going to run a criminal background check on me. You better believe that I've been picked up more than a few times, that I've got quite the long criminal history. Well, let's say I can get past that criminal history part. They're willing to take a chance on me anyways. I do not know, but what is the beginning wage at McDonald's, hourly wage? Probably like 7 something an hour, and then you gotta deduct all your taxes and stuff. Oh, by the way, that's not what they make per hour when they're being trafficked. And no one's deducting their taxes or their benefits from that transaction. So all of those things make it very difficult for kids to leave even when they want to. When we look at kids that are recruited into sex trafficking, we see pretty strong overarching Venn diagrams, if you will, about what makes a kid vulnerable to recruitment. What are those factors that have led them, or that at least are concurring in lots of different kids that we recover? So the first one, runaways or homeless. Kids that do not have a stable place to stay are very easily recruited into a trafficking situation. History of sexual abuse. Our statistics show that anywhere from 70 to 90% of the kids that we recover have been sexually abused prior to their recruitment into trafficking. So you can see why that's another pot of kids, so to speak, that is very likely to be involved with the child protective system. And with kids who have been sexually abused, there's a lot of reasons why that makes them an attractive victim to a potential trafficker. One is that if you're a kid that has had a history of being sexually abused, for many of these kids, they have learned to disassociate while they're in an abusive situation. Okay, they've learned that they can't scream, cry, kick when it's happening because that makes it worse for them. So they've learned to be compliant in an exploitative situation. You can understand why that would make them attractive to a trafficker. And then on top of that, kids who have been sexually abused, they have very complicated and often very toxic opinions about body image, about sex and sexual touching and arousal, because all those things have been misused against them. So it's easy for a kid who says, you know what, my dad or my uncle was abusing me and I wasn't getting paid to do it. At least when I go out at night, these, men who purchase time with me, at least they pay me for what they're doing. And you hear a lot of kids, unfortunately, say that very matter-of-factly. But the overarching thing that brings all these kids together is that they have some kind of void in their life that traffickers have learned to exploit. The first few months that I started on this job, I was talking with one of my colleagues who, now he works for the governor's office, but at that time he worked for ACH Family, a child placing agency and foster care homes, and he worked out of the Fort Worth area. And I said, how did you become involved with this issue? And he said, a couple of years ago, we realized they have a very big facility in Fort Worth. We realized that traffickers were literally parking in the parking lot across the street from our facility and waiting for kids to come out and approaching them right as they came out of our facility, to go to school or to go to an appointment. Anytime that kid was unsupervised, they were getting approached by a trafficker, because the traffickers knew that this agency houses a bunch of vulnerable kids. So all we had to do was offer to take this kid to a meal or up to 7-Eleven, very low entry things, because nobody was providing that for this kid. Another example that I like to give is, there are a lot of parents that think like, this could never happen to my child. It's never going to be my kid. But because my kid, has everything that they want. But here's the thing. You'll have, let's say you have a teenage son, and your son says to you, I want the new Kevin Durant Air Jordans that are out there. They're like $300 basketball shoes, okay? So you look at your sweet teenage son and you say to your son, you are not getting $300 basketball shoes. Okay, number one, because you're gonna grow out of them in like 2 weeks, because you eat everything in my house and you're growing all the time. Number two, I'm not wearing $300 shoes, so you're definitely not wearing a $300 pair of shoes, okay? So your kid, don't know what your kid says to your face, but your kid goes upstairs and they get on their device that they've got in their room, their iPad, their iPhone, whatever, and they get on Snapchat. And here's how it goes. My mom is such a bitch. She won't get me the new KD Air Jordans. Nobody cares about what I want. My life is terrible. Everybody hates me, right? Okay? So then, puts out that Snapchat. And within a few minutes, you get someone that says, hey, I have a connection that can send you some. I'd be happy to do that for you. Or, hey, I'm here to listen for you. Or, I care about what you want. I'm your friend. I love you. Parents don't understand, etc., okay? And your kids and our kids, they respond very quickly to that affirmation and to that, hey, I get it. Parents are idiots. They don't know anything, but I'm your friend and I'm here for you, right? Those are the type of very subtle grooming that makes any kid an easy victim if they haven't been told, this is what people will tell you online, okay? This is who's behind the computer. So, when it comes to sex trafficking numbers, I told you we're only going to talk about numbers that we can validate. 2017, 1 in 7 of our runaways were sex trafficking victims, and 88% of those sex trafficking victims are kids from the foster care system. 88%. That's almost all of them, guys. I mean, that's basically almost all of them. And that percentage has continued to creep up every year. So when I started at the National Center 3 years ago, it was only 63% of the sex trafficking kids were foster care involved. Now we're up to 88%. When it comes to the type of kids that we see, obviously we see boys and girls, we see kids of all sexual orientations, races, economic levels, and education levels. That's part of why I was giving that Snapchat example. However, we see that child sex trafficking disproportionately affects kids that are young. And so when I say young, we see kids being recruited into sex trafficking around age 11 is when they start the grooming process. Kids that are financially poor, like I said, kids that have that need resources, youth of color, girls, immigrants, and kids that identify as LGBTQ. You can see over the last 5 years, 95% of the sex trafficking cases that the National Center worked on are female cases. So that is predominantly what we're seeing. When it comes to the racial breakdown of cases that we've worked on, there is nothing that goes over 50%, but almost 42% of the cases are African American, 35% of the cases are white kids, and then 11% of the cases are Hispanic. And so, unfortunately, when you look at those numbers, it does tend to affect youth of color more predominantly than Caucasian youth. The average age of recruitment into sex trafficking of kids that are reported to the National Center is only 15. So as I said, the grooming starts very young, so that by the time they're 14 or 15, they are fully ready to go into the life. With the cases that we work on, we have also given a breakdown of who was the legal guardian of the victim when we recovered them. So 71% almost foster care and social services, and then 28% of the biological family members. The other breakdowns, legal guardians, step parents, other, and unknown, are obviously very statistically small. When we recover kids, we look at where they went missing from as part of the evaluation. So you can see just about half of the cases, the kids went missing from a foster care or group home. But about 27% of the cases, they went missing from home of their biological parents. And we also have up here, medical facilities, so RTCs, about 3% of them. Religious or recreational facilities, so they go missing from church, from mall, from they're at the football game and you can't find them anymore, about 7% of the cases. We also did a statistical analysis of the number of cases resolved by state. So you can see this is kind of like a heat map of what cases are we having more and more sex trafficking, child sex trafficking cases worked on. And unfortunately, Texas is in the red. We're at the highest level. And we share that distinction with a lot of our border states. So California, Florida, New York, Ohio, and certainly that shouldn't be surprising. But as you can see, any of our states do we have vulnerabilities to trafficking. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know I'm getting kind of towards the end of my time, and I should have told you guys to interrupt me if you have questions. Yes, sir.
Well, some of this data is available on your website, I presume?
All of this data is available on our website. Yep.
Thank you.
If you go to missingkids.org/data, you'll find all of the numbers that I talked about. Anything else? Okay. So the indicators of child sex trafficking, I want to talk about this briefly. The thing about child sex trafficking is that there's not going to be any one indicator, unless you catch the kid literally in the act, that tells you, this kid is being trafficked. The thing about discovering that a kid is being trafficked or is being groomed for trafficking is you have to know this kid and regularly dialogue with them so that you can start to get a sense of those red flags, that things don't add up, this doesn't seem right. So the first one I have up here, child has an older friend or boyfriend who seems controlling or overly interested. You're going to notice that for many of these indicators, there's a level of subjectiveness even within the indicator itself. Older, what do I mean by older? Do I mean, 30 days older? My husband loves to tell people that he married an older woman. I was born on January 1st, he was born on January 31st, okay? I'm like, you need to stop selling that. I'm not older than you, right? But I remember when I was in high school, there were very strict rules about dating in my household, right? I wasn't allowed to date until I was 16. I wasn't allowed to date boys that were much older than me. So if I said, hey, I met, Johnny that goes to the community college, he's 19, my dad would have been like, yeah, no. And then it was someone that came to my house, that got out of their car, that came up to the front step and introduced themselves to my parents. I wasn't going out with people that my parents didn't know. And I should say, I went to high school in a suburb of the Dallas area, South Lake Carroll. So there's not really, it's a small town. Like people, they know everybody. So there's already an element of familiarity there that, makes it a little bit safer. But for many of these kids, they don't have someone that's overseeing their day-to-day interactions. They don't have someone that's concerned about who these kids might be dating or interested in a sexual relationship with. Child uses advanced sexual terms not age appropriate or has a high number of sexual partners for age. Some of these you're going to say to yourself, well, how would I know? How would I know if the kid on my caseload has a high number of sexual partners? How would I know if they're using sexual terms that aren't appropriate for their age? Again, all of this is about, do you regularly dialogue with the kid, and do you dialogue with them in a way that is non-judgmental, okay? Part of the role of being an advocate is you do have to get into their best interest. You have to go in and tell a court what you think is best for them. But it's hard to know what's best for a kid if you aren't getting a lot of information back from them. So I really encourage you, and I know it's hard. It's hard for me too, because I have plenty of idiotic clients, right? And they want really stupid things, but they want stupid things because they're 15. And I wanted stupid things at 15. I thought I was gonna be a famous singer, okay? But I didn't have the internet for someone to tell me, you could be a famous singer and I am an agent and come sign with me, okay? So that just amplifies my risk. Child has a history of STDs or pregnancies, terminated pregnancies. Do we lose?
No, there's like a weird background. I'm just
Oh, I'm sorry guys.
No.
So, one of the things that's very important to be aware of is if you have a kid on your caseload that goes missing and they are recovered, it's very important for them to get medical care as soon as they come back in, as soon as they're recovered. Obviously, if there is any indication that they have been sexually assaulted or victimized while they were on the run, if they make any kind of disclosure that leads you that way, it is great to let medical know so that they can get a SANE exam. But it's just important for them to get a medical exam when they've gone missing, because there's a lot of things that a trained medical professional can talk with them about and can discover that's very important. One of the trainings that I do is a day-long training that is about this issue, and we have a variety of different speakers that come in and present. And one of the sessions that we do is we bring in a panel of foster care alumni from the area. We work with the PAL coordinator to bring in some kids that have already aged out of care, and they speak very candidly about their experiences in care. And one of the things that one of the kids brought up and it's been brought up a few times since then, is that she contracted an STD from a trafficking situation, an exploitative situation while she was on the run, and she didn't realize that the STD could impact her long-term fertility. Okay, so this young lady is now in her late 20s, and she has a stable life, and she's married, and she wants to have kids with her husband, but she can't, because when she was a teenager, she got an STD from a trafficking situation, and she was too afraid to tell anybody because she thought that she was going to get in trouble for having sex, and she didn't realize that it wasn't just like an uncomfortable situation. It was something that could drastically impact her life for forever. So again, it's important to let the kids know that medical care is available to them, and that anything they want to disclose is kept confidential, and that they are not being judged for anything that happened while they were gone. So if they are going to disclose, let's say, that they've had intravenous drug use, you want to make sure that they feel comfortable to let a medical professional know that, so that they get the right kind of treatment that they need. Child has gifts or items that do not align with their situation, or items that improve his or her appearance. As I mentioned, for traffickers, they recruit these kids very often by gifts or by doing things for them that cost money. And for kids, it's partially that it entices them into the lifestyle, but it's partially that it also makes the kid feel like, you know, you're someone that's listening. So go back to that example I gave you of your teenage son that wants, you know, those Air Jordans. So when someone that's grooming him online says, oh, I can send you those Air Jordans, no problem, it tells the kid a couple of things. Number one, it says, this is someone that cares about me and what I want, okay? Mom doesn't care about what I want. She won't get me those $300 Air Jordans. But then it also tells the kid, wow, this is someone that has the kind of lifestyle or connections that can get $300 Air Jordans at the, you know, snap of a finger. My lame old mom that works for the National Center, she is poor and she doesn't make any money. And that's definitely not the lifestyle I want to be living. It doesn't matter how great she says her job makes her feel. I want to be able to afford the good things in life. And working for the National Center doesn't do it. But this guy that I'm talking to online, he's got some cool job that just rakes in the dough, right? And I think we've all figured out that you know, money does not come easily, and so, but kids have not realized that anyone that's promising you quick riches is, you know, trying to get you ensconced in a bad situation or potentially a MLM direct sales. You know, be aware. These kids, you know, I've had plenty of kids that'll say to me, my trafficker beat me up, you know, sold me multiple times a day, but every night when I was done, they took me to McDonald's and let me order whatever I wanted to eat for dinner, and my foster family never did that, okay? And I'm just like, this is so sad and insane all at the same time, because I think back to like when I was in high school and I could seriously put down food. I was a soccer player, and I would go and order 2 supersized meals. 4 cheeseburgers, 2 sets of supersized fries, 2 supersized pops. I would down all of this in one meal after a practice, okay? Like probably 6,000 calories or something like that. But that whole meal is like $10, right? $12, let's say. I can promise you, nobody is convincing me to do anything for $10. Like literally anything that I'm not already gonna do. But these kids feel like this is an investment in me, they're listening to my needs, and they don't think about like, hey, there's a lot easier ways to get a meal from McDonald's. So be aware that even in good foster homes, even in good placements, the kids are still very vulnerable because there's all kinds of things that don't happen for them that distinguish them as different from the other kids that they want to keep up with. Child is distrustful of law enforcement or authority. We have one law enforcement in uniform in here. And I can tell you, I work with law enforcement every day. He still makes me nervous in his uniform. And I'm an adult. He's also pretty tall, so that's like, he's got the dual intimidation factor. And he's got a really dope mustache, so he like looks very serious. But imagine that I'm your 15-year-old daughter and I've done something wrong. And something that I'm like, you know, I ran away from home, but then I got trafficked while I'm on the run. So I'm a victim, but I also know I wasn't supposed to run away. And now this cop sees me hanging around, loitering, and he's like asking me some questions. And on the one hand, I want to let someone know I've been victimized. But on the other hand, I know there's a truancy warrant out for me. Or I know my parent, you know, my foster family is going to be real pissed when I get picked up again. So understand how that's very complicated, and on top of that, because these kids have often had bad experiences with authority figures, with law enforcement before, they are very reluctant to believe that, you know, this officer that they're just casually interacting with, this person cares about them enough to listen beyond the first, you know, the first bad thing, okay? Child's behavior begins to change in daily life or online. Child is observed or recovered in a sex trafficking hotspot area. I don't really know Athens that well, so I can't tell you if there's an area that's like specifically known for trafficking or prostitution. Dallas certainly has those areas. But I can say if you see any hotels that rent by less than a full night, that is always a good indication when people only need partial use of a room that there is some sex trafficking related activities going on. Yes, ma'am.
I'm real curious to know, do they actually self-identify as a victim? Or do they think of themselves as being street smart and how they're making it on the streets and nothing bad is because they haven't been kidnapped or tortured or any of those things that people think of as being victimized? So am I actually savvy and I'm cool on the streets, or am I going to identify as a victim?
Good question. For almost all of these kids, the initial stages are they are not going to identify as a victim at all. And you, as CASA workers, as caseworkers, as advocates for vulnerable kids, it is going to be very unlikely that you ever have a kid fully disclose to you, I am a victim, I'm being taken advantage of in this way. It is just exceedingly rare when it comes to trafficking victims because of the way that they're groomed. So that's why it's important for you to be looking out for those red flags that, you know, their stories don't align with their situation, and even if they think they're street smart, these kids are victims no matter what. And that's part of what's really hard for any of us in an authority position to help them is, you know, the common edict, for example, in addiction is that you can't help someone recover from addiction until they want to recover, right? You know, we're not going to break them of it just by keeping them from it. And that's very true with kids that are trafficking victims as well. And that's why it's a give and take the entire time to work with these kids, because it's very hard to get them to accept that they are worthwhile, that they deserve help, and that what is happening to them is wrong. And part of why they have a hard time accepting what's happening is wrong is they've already been taken advantage of or abused in other situations. And so they've already been, you know, primed to think this is the way the world works, and this is what, you know, this is what should be happening to me. This is what I deserve. Any other questions? Okay. I just want to show one other slide quickly with respect to tattoos. Tattoos is something that has a lot of correlation, I should say specific tattoos, so I don't want to offend anyone that has tattoos in here. Tattoos themselves do not indicate trafficking. Specific types of tattoos tend to be highly correlated with trafficking, and especially on kids. You know, technically, kids aren't supposed to be able to get tattoos until they're 18 unless a parent or guardian goes in and signs for them. So, number one, if you have a kid on your caseload that's not 18 that has tattoos, you know, you kind of want to know how they got those tattoos. This is also part of developing rapport if you can talk with the kid in a non-judgmental way about their tattoos. So, you know, two of the examples we have up here of tattoos that are highly correlated with trafficking victims. The one that you guys see, I guess it would be on your left, my right, is a tattoo that has a crown symbol in it. A big part of the sex trafficking culture is that people who are sellers, who are pimps, that they are kings, that they run this town, that they're, you know, on top of everything, they're rulers. And so there's a lot of royalty type of symbology in those tattoos. So that is often a very good clue. And then the other one, it's a little bit hard to see from where y'all are, but it is a tattoo inside a young lady's lip, and it is the name of her trafficker. So name tattoos are always going to be a red flag for us. And I'm sorry if any of y'all have someone's name tattooed on you, but name tattoos are highly correlated to trafficking situations because the traffickers like to make sure that their kids know you belong to me. You are my possession, I own you, and many of them go so far as to tattoo UPC, you know, barcodes on their kids. So barcodes would be another one. They're not cute tattoos at all, so barcodes straight up, you should be very concerned if you ever see a kid with a barcode tattoo on them. And you'll see lots of them put them on the base of their neck or right under, you know, right at the edge of their hairline so that they're not like initially somewhere that you're looking for a tattoo. They're not super visible right off the bat. So that's all I have. I know I have a lot of information because this presentation is usually like 2.5 hours. But this is my information, if I can ever help you guys. Really, you know, what today was intended to be was just a very high-level overview into how do kids get trafficked and what kind of information do we have about kids that are being trafficked from care. As I said, and I'll say it over and over again, you are the front line and you are the best resource for discovering if a kid is being victimized, because if you are regularly talking with a kid, you are going to get that information without the kid being interrogated. You are going to hear things that you think this is not right, okay? This kid is vulnerable, or this kid is already being exploited. So if there's anything I can ever do to help you, and even if it's just as simple as, hey, my kid said X, Y, and Z, can I run this by you and tell you what, tell me what you think about it? I'm happy to do that as well. All the way up to, if you have an active case and you want, just some additional communication, I will do anything I can within the laws that I have to act within. So, thank y'all so much for participating today. Hopefully it was helpful.
Do you mind fielding a couple of questions?
That's fine. And I should say, I'm happy to field questions if y'all need to leave. I'm a lawyer, I don't have feelings, so you can leave whenever you want if it doesn't offend me, so.
With that said, I would like to thank all of you for coming today, especially those of you that are out of our network, that aren't part of our organization. We really appreciate you taking an interest in the kids in your community, in our community, and serving them the best that we can. If you do have questions that you want to ask in this forum, let's do so rather quickly. If not, if you'd rather come and do a one-on-one, I bet we can field some of those as well.
Yeah.
If not, thanks again for being here. We certainly appreciate you and hope you enjoyed the information that you got today.
Megan, question. You talked about the myths, the trafficking myths. How many of the youth, I think there's a common misconception that trafficking equals travel. How many of your youth are trafficked on the road and how many are trafficked out of their hometown?
Yeah, that's a really good question. She said there's a common misconception about trafficking meaning traveling. And that's one of the ones that is always so frustrating because there's a lot of confusion, even within what media reports. There was a case, I think it was already last year, it was down in San Antonio. They found a bunch of people in a trailer and most of them were dead because they had suffocated. And the case kept being reported as a human trafficking case. And I was like, well, it might be a human trafficking case, but the only thing we know for sure is that it's a human smuggling case because they have been smuggled across the border. Whether they've been trafficked or not, we don't know. It's likely that they were going to be trafficked when they got here or have high vulnerability. But for most kids, part of what makes trafficking so hard to detect among minors is that they mostly are trafficked right within their own communities. They don't need to go far, and it's like I said, we have buyers in our own communities, so the kids don't need to travel in order to be sold. Occasionally we do see it, and normally it becomes a red flag when the kids are traveling to really odd places. So we had one girl a few months ago that was recovered that was continually traveling from Fort Worth to Abilene. But it's like she has no family in Abilene, she has no connection to Abilene, and as far as I know, Abilene is not a tourist destination, so it was like, okay, why is she regularly going to Abilene and who's getting her there?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
So I do have a question as well. So when you talk about the demographics of the African American and then white and then Hispanic, is that we see a lot of Hispanics here in Athens in the school settings that we serve our kids with. Is that Hispanic number lower, do you think? Because number one, they're they're undocumented. A lot of people don't know where they are, traveling from and to, and they're just hard to trace, or?
So that's a good question. Obviously, I can only hypothesize, don't know for sure. Her question was really, do you feel like the percentage of kids from the Hispanic is lower because they're not being reported? I would say yes. I've lived in 2 other Hispanic countries and lived and served there, and obviously, part of what makes it so difficult is there's a very big cultural difference in most Latin American countries, that there is an extreme distrust of law enforcement because of corruption. And so we often see Hispanic communities, when a kid goes missing, you see like the homemade missing signs and things like that, and the parents do not want to interact with law enforcement, even if they have legal status. So obviously, if they don't have legal status, that even further complicates the situation. And certainly if the kid is an undocumented minor that's come across themselves, that is another whole, can of worms to open. There was an article a couple of weeks ago that I was talking with some people about, that was talking about the number of kids that were unaccompanied minors at the Texas border, that now Health and Human Services, the national department, doesn't know where those kids are. And I was like, here's the thing, that's like it's a slippery slope to go down, because on the one hand, does that department know where the kids are? No, they don't. But to say these kids are missing is possibly a misnomer, because for many of those kids, and I can say many of the kids on the orphanage I lived on in Honduras that are now here in the United States came under similar circumstances. They come to the border, they present at the border, and they get placed somewhere that they have no intention of going to. So like, they know that mom is here in the US working and mom is undocumented, so when they get caught at the border, and most of them just present themselves at the border, they then say, oh, I have a family friend. And it's always someone that's legal that can take them. They go to that family friend, they get placed there, but then they immediately leave to go be with their mom. So is the kid missing? I mean, they're missing in the sense that the agency that's supposed to be tracking them is doing a pretty crappy job at it. But are they missing in the sense that this is representing a big chunk of kids that are being exploited? Who's to say? Many of them are where they always intended to go, which could be a good or a bad thing.
I just wondered with the demographic.
Yeah.
Demographic.